Welcome to Believers, where you can learn and discover from those that take committed action in their business. Learn from their experience, knowledge, and wisdom, born out of putting their time and effort into what has purpose and meaning for them as leaders. Their self-direction gives them continued motivation in the face of hardship. And from them, we too can be inspired to discover our very own path of value and committed action. Please welcome your host, Dov Ben Yaakov Kurtzman.
Hello and welcome to Bleeders, a business showcase. We have an amazing guest for you today, Ivan Lewis, former MP for Bury South and government minister, including ministry fields like foreign affairs, global development, and even educational and health. And so hopefully we'll be able to get an insight from him today on current affairs. Certainly plenty to talk about. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Ivan Lewis. Hello, Ivan.
Hi, how are you?
Wonderful. First of all, it's a big honor to have you as my guest on the Bleeders Show. I'm also very privileged to have you as a friend. And I remember a few years ago, I used to pass your old office and say, "Oh, I wonder if I'll ever meet this man." And but fortunately, we were introduced by a mutual family, a mutual friend, and ever since we've been in touch. And I really, really appreciate your support to the work that I'm doing. And I think you're a very important guest on this Bleeders Showcase. Because of your experience and your insight and knowledge into government affairs, and there's no doubt about the fact that we need some clarity on what's going on today. If you take, the past few years, we've had Brexit issues in this country, which has certainly split society in a certain way. And then just as we were kind of coming out of that, we got into a 2020 pandemic, and that's kind of locked people away, and it's caused a lot of frustration. And now even the trying to ease that lockdown is causing frustration in its own self. Do we do this? Is it 2 meters? Is it 1 meter? And all the flights are not going. We can't travel. We have to come back. There's 2 weeks quarantine, all sorts of guidelines that are not sure. And to be able to, pick your brain and say, especially with your interest in mental health, how do you kind of look at all what's been going on in our society and, right up till today?
Well, we've been going through tumultuous change, unprecedented change, and I think that puts massive pressure on individuals, on communities, on relationships. So there is no doubt a big mental well-being challenge. You only need to look at the impact of coronavirus, the isolation that's led to for many people, the lack of ability to move freely, the pressure that's placed on relationships, on families, the isolation and loneliness of single people. And I think that one of the healthy things maybe is that we now talk about mental well-being, which is something that you have taken a lead on, Dov, in a very innovative way. We talk about that, in all sections of society, and recognize that mental health issues are not confined to any class, any group of people, but affect us all. And mental well-being, is absolutely central to having a decent society, and particularly amongst young people. So I do think that the change that we've seen that has been unprecedented, maybe unexpected, sometimes feels out of control, places a lot of pressure on people.
And could you maybe give us an insight, because you're well placed to at least give us an insight, what would be going through the government's mind, their discussions?
Yeah.
What would we be thinking about all this?
It's an unprecedented crisis. Let's be clear. You can plan for pandemics on paper and have all sorts of policy documents and strategy documents. When something like this hits, nobody has all of the answers. And I think that's the first point I need to make. I think that we went into lockdown late in the UK. I don't think we've had enough of the right equipment for frontline staff. I think we've had major problems, for example, in care homes. So I think there are issues where, frankly, this country has not done very well. However, some of the judgments that politicians are being asked to make, advised by scientists, are indeed have a very fine line. You know, when should schools reopen? When is it okay for grandparents to hug their grandkids again? These are very, very difficult judgment calls because we can never eliminate risk. I think what we're talking about is minimizing risk and balancing risk with quality of life and people's mental health and people's ordinary expectations of what quality of life means. So when politicians are criticised, it's very easy to criticise our leaders in these circumstances. Very easy indeed. And I think I said where I think they've got it wrong. But equally, some of the judgment calls that they've made, they've got it right. And some of them, there is no right answer. There is a very, very delicate balance. And I think that that is played out, you know, every day in this crisis. You have a news conference led by a senior politician on a daily basis. They are at least accountable and subject to public.
So do you think they're just making it up as they go along because they've got, I mean, or is there some sort of plan in place?
I don't think anybody in a responsible position in this country makes it up as they go along. I think there are many factors that are taken into account. So, for example, there is obviously science should lead the decisions that are made, but I suspect that the decisions that has been made recently about single people is also to some extent to do with mental health. There are decisions that are being made which have to balance the interests of the economy and getting the economy moving again with the health of people. Now, people will say, you know, health should come before business. Of course it should come before business. But what I'm saying is, in no circumstances are we able, are politicians or anybody able to eliminate risk. We're talking about finely balanced judgments, minimizing risk, making judgments when risk is reducing, and then making appropriate decisions. And to some extent, this is about personal responsibility and personal behavior, not just about political leadership and political decisions. So I'll criticize them where they've got it wrong, but let's be clear, these are very, very difficult judgment calls.
Okay, now, well, moving on from that then to personal responsibility and personal behavior, there's also it seems to be going on, another kind of pandemic going around the world, which is the Black Lives Matter and the demonstrations that are going on. And this new development, even in the last few hours in America and certainly in this country, of bringing down statues, historical statues, for what meaning that they may have. What came to mind for me was concentration camps, Holocaust memorials. They too could have been destroyed, but the Jewish people tended not to destroy them, to leave them there as a sign to show and remember what was there. Do you think that bringing down statues of people that maybe were involved with slavery might be a wrong move?
Look, let's be clear. All forms of violence are wrong. And people who are hijacking this issue for political extremist reasons, I don't have any sympathy with them. But is there a just and valid cause about a horrendous murder of a black person by a police officer, which raises much more fundamental questions about 21st century racism against black people? Of course, there are serious issues that we need to face up to. And let's be clear, it's one thing having a concentration camp which ensures that people can remember the past and experience the full scale of man's greatest inhumanity to man. That is very different than statues which glorify people. Let's be clear, statues that glorify people who are engaged in the slave trade. That is completely different. There are no statues that are visited by large numbers of people to Adolf Hitler, glorifying the man and all the criminal acts that atrocious acts he committed. So look, there are some, when we talk about statues and memorials, let's be clear, let's differentiate between those that are necessary for historical purposes and where individuals have committed horrendous atrocities are being glorified. Of course, it's reasonable to question whether those monuments are appropriate. I don't believe in pulling them down, because I'm not a person who supports violence or extremism. But I do think that we should review where we are glorifying people who, on the whole, have committed terrible atrocities.
So we should think again, and from a legal perspective, of possibly removing them if they're bringing offence to parts of our population, and
Look,
possibly.
I've always been a moderate politician. You know, some people would say I was a Blairite or a New Labour person or a Brown, whatever you want to call me. I don't believe in violence in the pursuit of political objectives. I don't believe in ultra extremism, but I do believe in justice. I do believe that if you're an anti-racist, you have to be consistent. We fought like mad against anti-Semitism on the left, on the far left, in the Labour Party. We demanded, we Jewish people, that non-Jews stood up and be counted. Well, frankly, the same has to apply to black people. And it is a nonsense to suggest, sadly, all these years on, after the successes of the civil rights movement, of legislation, of attitudinal change, I'm afraid to say it is nonsense to think that racism is fixed in any society, because it clearly isn't. And black people, many black people experience this on a daily basis. We have to be empathetic with that, but more than that, we have to understand the need for constant change.
Constant change, absolutely. So we'll have Ruth Benson coming and saying, hi, always good to hear Ivan Lewis and his perspective on these challenging times. So really, thank you very much, Ruth Benson, for joining in and participating. She also says, couldn't agree more, Ivan. So you were, I think, if records are correct, the first Jewish member of Parliament to wear a head covering in the House of Commons, to wear a kippah.
That's correct. That's correct.
What was your decision behind doing that?
It was very simple, Dov. I've been on a religious journey. I started to wear my kippah in Manchester on a full-time basis, and I used to get the train to London and then take it off as I was approaching the House of Commons. It didn't feel right. Why should I feel the need to take it off? I'm proud of being Jewish, proud of the fact that I've become more observant in recent times. That's a journey that I've been on. Very happy to share that with people. But basically, it felt hypocritical. And, you know, the biggest single issue was how my being self-conscious. It wasn't the reaction of others to me. The vast majority of people either didn't notice or were actually very supportive of the decision that I made. But I wasn't making a political stand or a political statement. The statement I was making was that I didn't think it was right to, once I'd reached that stage of wearing a kippah full-time in Manchester, why on earth shouldn't I wear it in London and in my place of work? And at that time, my place of work was the House of Commons.
And do you think, therefore, that bringing in this whole idea of anti-racism, Black Lives Matter, and your experience of publicly at work in the House of Commons exposing the fact that you're a religious Jewish person, do you feel that in general that there is more tolerance in the United Kingdom with regards to minorities, with regards to different religions? Would you say that that was correct?
More tolerance than historically, probably. We're on a journey. We've made progress, but we've made nowhere near enough progress. Look, one of the reasons cited by many people who were lifelong Labour voters that they didn't vote for Corbyn was because of anti-Semitism. It wasn't the only reason, but it was one of the reasons they cited. And the vast majority of those people were not Jewish. That was very reassuring. It was very uplifting. It was inspiring, I think, for members of the British Jewish community. But I think we've become complacent. We've sort of said racism, box ticked, move on. We've made this progress and everything's fine. It's not fine. There is still inherent racism of all kinds in our society. And at the end of the day, it's not for us to say to, for example, in the context of the current demonstrations, to black people, they have no right to feel the way they do. That many black people on a daily basis experience racism. And it's wrong. It's wrong in us as a civilized society, and we should call it out. We should stand together. All forms of racism, we should mean it when we say zero tolerance. Not simple, because attitudinal change is much more difficult than legislative change.
I think the Bleeders, as part of our policy, is about a community. It's about doing things together. It's about standing together. And I think that echoes what you're bringing now regarding racism, that, all minorities, this is something that we should stand together, not just if you're a minority, but even if you're from the majority in the country. This is something that we don't want in our society, something that's poisonous to our society, and that we can only benefit if there's...
And you can say that you don't approve of the violence. You don't approve of those who hijack these issues for political extremist reasons. You can say all of that whilst at the same time admitting, accepting, acknowledging there is a racism problem that is ongoing in our society in the UK and around the world. And we should stand together in fighting against that racism, in building bridges between communities, in working together where we have mutual interests, as well as respecting our differences.
22 years you were in that game, and now you're got your life ahead of you. What
got my life back, some people would say.
What's in the horizon? What path are you going to be on now?
Well, I've always been given the chance to combine earning a living with changing the world. And I've always regarded that as being a tremendous gift. So what I hope to be able to do is that, again, in whatever sphere I decide to go next. I'm very interested in global development, very interested in the richest countries' responsibilities to the poorest countries. Keen to see us do more, not in terms of perpetuating aid in places like Africa, but self-sufficiency, ending aid dependency, supporting those countries to come out of poverty. Very interested in those global issues. Back home, I'm still very focused on mental health and mental well-being, involved with the Jewish Action for Mental Health in Manchester. Intend to campaign on these issues. I've spoken openly about my own struggles with mental health challenges. Support very much of the work that you're doing around post-trauma specifically, but on a broader mental well-being agenda as well. So I guess domestically, focus on mental health, and globally on development. And I would like to also contribute to what I see a growing possibility for peace in the Middle East between Israel and the moderate Arab states, and see how we can add value and make a contribution to that. I was very fortunate to be the Minister for Africa and the Minister for the Middle East. So I'm hoping to be able to combine some of that experience to make a contribution globally, but also here in Manchester, continue to contribute locally. I mean, one of the things that's kept me sane during lockdown has been able to do voluntary work for the Meals on Wheels service, Jewish community Meals on Wheels service, support people in a wider way in the community. That's kept my mental well-being going, by being able to make a contribution. So maybe sometimes you do your 22 years. I'm proud of what I tried to do, the difference I tried to make in the jobs that I had in government and as a member of parliament for my constituents. But now it's time for a new chapter. But I hope that new chapter is along the same lines in terms of combining that earning a living, which we all have to do, with changing the world.
And if somebody watching this would like to get in touch with you, what would be the best way to do that?
Contact ivanlewis@gmail.com is probably the best way, or if you're a Manchester City fan, Main Road 67 at live.co.uk.
Okay. So Ivan Lewis is one word, or it has a dot between Ivan and Lewis?
No, it's lowercase, one word. One word.
One word. Ivan Lewis at gmail.com.
Contact Ivan Lewis at gmail.com. Contact Ivan Lewis at gmail.com.
Okay, wonderful. So I'd like to wish you all the best in the rest of your journey, and much success. And it leaves me to say, Ivan Lewis, thank you very much for being my guest.
Thanks for the opportunity, Dar. All the best.